I mean, like, especially by nature of just like it being an artistic, like collaborative profession,
Yeah,
I mean, that's part of it is being able to be together and
yeah,
bounce. I mean, it's still, this is still a super useful tool, but you just can't replace like the chemistry of a room, you
yeah,
know,
yeah. It's true.
like, yeah, yeah, it's just not the same. But it also, at least like, I know that like I was working on a project this week for this, like we have this thing at our school called First Friday, where it's like
Okay.
the first Friday of every month. It's kind of like a showcase presentation where it's like it happens on site at the school when we're not locked down, but there's like dance performances, music performances,
Oh,
theater
that's great.
performances, all
Yeah.
kinds of, and then the public is actually can come in and like watch and like take tours of the school, and it's kind of used as a promotional tool as well for the school. But
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're doing like virtual First Friday that's like going to be broadcast on public access here in town.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And so I did like a collaborative, I did like a musical collaboration with a couple students, these two singers, and like I did all the instrumental tracks and recorded everything here, recorded some video, and
It's
then
so good.
it turned out pretty well. And
That's
they
fantastic.
literally like recorded their vocal tracks. I sent them the instrumental track. They recorded their vocal tracks with their earbud microphones. And then I
That's
just
so
and then I
awesome.
just like cleaned it up in like Logic, and like
Yeah.
incorporate, and it sounds really good. It sounds great.
It's really incredible. Like I'm at a loss of what if this had happened, like the quarantine situation had happened like 10 years ago and we didn't have all the same
I know.
resources. I know
Would
I'd be going insane.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it would have been nuts. Yeah, cool. Well, I'm gonna put you on speaker view. I mean, I guess we can get started. I'm sure some more people will start. People are starting to trickle in right now.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, we can just kind of like get going here. Um, yep. Everybody, this is, well, I'll let you introduce yourself. This is my friend Will Muto. um,
Hi everybody. I'm Will, and I uh, was going to talk about what I do for a living, which is I work as a pipeline technical director at Industrial Light and Magic, which is Lucasfilm and Disney's visual effects department. So we add visual effects to movies, TV shows, and commercials, and and as a pipeline TD, I write software for the artists, so you can think of every movie, the production of every movie as an assembly line. So we have a lot of really talented artists who are very good at their at their job, and they specialize in one particular part of the process. And so we write a whole lot of software to ensure that the artists can work really, really fast, really efficiently, and that they can give their work from one department to another. And we do all sorts of visual effects. You may think of like big explosions. You may think of, spaceships and buildings collapsing and stuff like that when you think of like big budget visual effects. But we also do all sorts of things. We do a lot of digital humans. So some examples of this are uh, we do face replacements on stunt people. So if there's so if there's a stunt happening on set that the actor isn't doing, we'll digitally put the actor's face onto the stunt person. We'll do full digital doubles, so full replacements for really dangerous stunts. We'll put in a completely digital human for shots like that. A recent example of a really good recent example of digital humans and like face replacement was for the Netflix movie The Irishman, where ILM aged a group of actors because the movie takes place over a long period of time to make the actors more realistically fit in each time period. We did a lot of digital makeup on those actors. We'll also do things like set extensions. So on set, only a small piece of the set will actually be built practically. And then it's our job to add the rest of the world around the set to make it look convincing. And we'll also do crowds. So for really large, I have some examples too. I have a lot of visuals to show. For really large things like huge battles or for stadiums, it's very impractical to hire 60,000 extras. So we'll do really large simulations of digital humans to emulate the look of large crowds. Yeah, a lot of visual effects is invisible, which I find really fascinating. It's very obvious for blockbuster movies like the Avengers, for Star Wars, where like it's very obvious where there's a lot of visual effects, but in today's film world, all movies are VFX movies. Even like if you look at a recent example, the excellent movie Parasite that came out this past year, that was a very, very VFX heavy movie. A lot of that house, I think the whole second story of that house didn't exist. And you wouldn't even you wouldn't know. Like, it fooled me. Like, there's a lot of, and I look at this stuff all day, which is really amazing. So artists have gotten really, really good at not only making things that are fantastical and kind of otherworldly, but artists are also very, very good at fooling us into thinking something is real when it's really not. Yeah, and I write software. My job is to kind of address whatever issue or fire is currently happening. So I'll help out 3D modelers, animators, riggers, compositors, lighters, all editorial, all parts of the production pipeline. To kind of give a better idea, is it possible for me to share? Let's see. I'll try sharing it.
Oh, wait, no, I didn't enable it. Let me enable it.
Okay.
Hold on a sec. Let me go multiple participants, and then I'll do it.
Let's see if this works.
Wait, hold on a sec. Yeah. One participant can share at a time. Okay, great. Awesome. Right. You should be able to now.
Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so can you all see this image here? Yep. So this is the best. This isn't mine. This is by Andy Bean. But this is, I felt, one of the best examples of what the film production pipeline is like. There's a lot of these little steps to get the final images that you see on screen. So we mainly work in the middle and bottom layers. So layout places a lot of things in the shot and make sure the camera looks the way that the director wants. We have modelers who build things in 3D. Texturing makes those models look convincing. The texture artists make things look like glass or like rock. If it's a character or a creature, we have riggers, and if you can, a good way to think about it is, if the animator is a puppeteer, the rigger is the person who puts all the controls for the animator to make the puppet move. And you have animators effects for adding things like explosions, water simulations, things like that. Lighting is how we convincingly make these 3D models fit into the scene, where we try to mimic what lighting would be like on a set or in the real world. And those things are all rendered, so they're saved out to the computer. And in compositing, you'll see in some of my examples, you'll see all the different layers that will go into a particular shot. We call each of those layers elements. And compositors put them all together. And then there's final motion graphics and color correction, so it looks right in a theater. And then that's what you see on screen. So, so yeah, that's kind of a broad overview. If anyone had any questions, we can.
I actually do a really quick one. So that entire second part, like from the second line, the production,
mm-hmm.
you know, like the modeling, the little all those steps. This is in a completely digital environment, right? Like
yeah. So
that's what you're referring to it as.
Yeah. So we'll get for some movies. So for if you're working on an animated feature like Pixar or DreamWorks, or Ready Player One was we had almost like a huge, more than half of that movie was fully CG. That'll be completely 3D. A lot of times we'll get frames that were shot on set, so those are called plates. And so we'll get plates from set, which is all the photography of the actors on set, and then we add the elements, we add those CG bits to on top of those plates. But yeah, we work almost entirely in 3D. There's a couple we'll still do some practical stuff. You'll see some examples of that as well. ILM has a history of has a long history, has over 40 years of like building models. We don't really have a practical model shop anymore, but there are some shows that will still, the Mandalorian had some practical elements that some of our veteran model makers built as well. So
are any of the veteran model makers, like all the way back to like the Star Wars days, like are any of them still working, like in doing their thing?
Yeah, so a lot of people have moved into CG. It's really interesting to see, like ILM as a company we have some people who've been there for the entirety of when the company was created for New Hope. So
wow. I think
yeah,
I might have told you this story before, but I did this internship in Los Angeles when I was in high school, and it was with this woman. Her name was Camille Salucci, and she was the visual effects producer for Titanic, and she worked with James Cameron a lot.
Yeah.
But she took me to, I don't know if she had to go there. She just took me there for an experience. But I went to DreamWorks because her business partner worked at DreamWorks. And this guy, there was this older guy there, and they made a point of taking me up and like introducing me to him. And I wasn't aware of who he was at the time, but it was Ken Ralston, and who was like one of the Star Wars OGs, you know, and like, and they're like, do you know who you just met? And I was like, no. And they're like, that was Kenneth Ralston. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. But I was wondering like how many of those guys are still in play, especially in the ILM world, because they've.
Yeah, we have a lot of we have a lot of people from the model shop who are still around, and from the original model shop who are still around. Modeling now at ILM is called DMS, or the Digital Model Shop. Yeah, Dennis Mirren, he's semi-retired now. He's semi-retired last year or 2 years ago, but he was around. He was working on doing camera operation and stuff for A New Hope, and he's one of the creative supervisors now. And he still has an office at work, and you see him around every now and again. But we have a lot of texture painters and a lot of modelers who now they're classically trained. They went to art school, but now they work completely digitally for us. So yeah, it's a really great mix. You have a lot of really amazing experience, especially when you're trying to tackle a hard problem. You have a lot of people who have a lot of collective knowledge that you can tap, which is really amazing.
Very cool.
Did anyone have any other questions before I
do.
Sure. Hello.
What's up, Addie?
Hi, I'm Addie. I'm sorry I'm a little late, and I'll ask this before I do have to leave. I was like, I'll just pop in. What's going on before I have to go back to what I was doing? But
sure.
Do you, during like the animation process, like you were talking about the puppets and things, are there ever like people inside of those puppets, or do they have like suits or anything? Like, do you ever have people?
That is a very good question, because the answer is yes, sometimes. So for VFX, and also for animated features like Pixar or DreamWorks, animators will keyframe animate. So they'll work in software where they're posing the digital puppet for each frame or over a group of frames. But a lot of times we have to capture a lot of animation really fast. And so what we will do is we use a process called motion capture. So I have some reference here. So these suits look very silly. Let's see, share this. So this is from, so for Ready Player One, that was a boatload of motion capture, because all the characters were CG. So I'm gonna share this. So here's a picture from set from one of the motion capture volumes, and you can see these like very weird looking outfits that the actors are wearing. So each of those little ping pong ball looking things are trackers, which track points on their body. So we record all that motion, and so when someone's walking, we capture that as data, and then you can take that data and you can apply it to the digital puppet. So the CG character moves in the same way that that the person was moving in the volume. So yeah, it's a combination of both animators working in animation software like Maya, and also recording motion like on these suits. You can even see there's a rifle. One of the guys is holding like a big space gun. We track that motion as well. So the prop that's moving in space will move in our 3D software as well. And you can see even, I enjoy this I enjoy this job a lot, because even I get the opportunity to put on one of those weird looking suits to animate one of these CG characters. So that's on our motion capture stage at ILM.
What movie was that included in a movie?
This was for a test. So we'll do a lot of, since we essentially, even though we're part of Lucasfilm and we work on a lot of Star Wars movies and a lot of Marvel things because we're under Disney, we also get hired by other companies to do visual effects for them. So, and a director, the way the process works is a director will say, this is what I want to happen in this movie. And can you do that? And so we'll put together a test where we'll say, like, this is how we'll approach the problem. And this is how much it'll cost. This is an example of what it'll look like. And then we may or may not get the work. So it's, we're hired by clients to do stuff like this. So this was for a test. But every so often, it's at work, every so often you'll see an email come through that's like, hey, does anyone want to be a raptor in Jurassic Park? And so people will come down and they'll have like tryouts where you'll suit up and you'll act like a dinosaur, and they may use your acting in the final show. So there's a lot of really cool opportunities, and there's a stage team where there's a team, and they specialize in doing this puppeteering through motion capture. That volume you can't really see. It's a very, very large room where we have a lot of cameras that track those points, and those points are placed very strategically so we can replicate a skeleton, how a skeleton moves in CG. I think it's also interesting to talk about, like, when we're making characters, how much we're influenced by the real world. We have a lot of artists who they're the creature dev artists or creature development. Their job, they do a lot of rigging, like you saw in that pipeline diagram. They'll also do things like simulating muscle and skin. So like the way that muscle kind of and skin kind of folds and expands and contracts. And they are very, very good at replicating the way the human bodies like deform and move through space. It's really fascinating, for Avengers Endgame, with Smart Hulk, you can see a lot of that. There was a lot of work done to even replicating the way that when you're speaking, the way your lips kind of, when you open your mouth, there's like some stickiness to your lips as your mouth opens. It's not like just like open, close. There's a lot of work done to replicate these like nuances in a human performance.
As a side note, I just have to say, I was like looking at like some of the videos in the gallery view, and when you were talking about that, I saw a bunch of people going like, trying to test the stickiness of their mouth.
Yeah, it's really incredible. But what's great about this job is every movie is different, every problem's different. Every day there's a different fire. I enjoy the job because it's very fast paced, and film productions will work on a movie up to 2 weeks before release sometimes. We were making changes on Star Trek. It was Star Trek Beyond. We were making changes, I think it was 2 weeks before the movie came out.
Wow.
I think, and digitally you can do it.
Yeah, sure. That's pressure though, man.
Yeah. And you have a lot of people who are very, very good at what they do. And I think that's really incredible to see. Especially, I saw it in animation a lot. So I was at DreamWorks for a couple years, and we do a crew screening every sort of 3 months, so you can see where the movie is end to end, like as a whole. And you'd see there'd be some shots that would still be storyboards, so just pencil drawn with audio over it. And all of a sudden, it's crazy how fast everything just comes together, like right at right at the last second. A million times I've felt like, oh man, this is never going to get done, and then it always it always comes together. I was talking a lot. I hope I answered. Is it Eddie's questions? I hope I answered that.
Yeah,
Cool.
and then some. That was a great answer.
Sweet. Yeah, that's great timing for.
Yeah.
Yeah, were there any other questions? I can also show some visuals as well.
Yeah, I actually had a question.
Sure.
So I saw that you did work on The Mandalorian.
Yes.
I actually just finished The Mandalorian about a week ago, so it's really fresh in my mind.
Sweet.
You said that there actually were some like physical models made for The Mandalorian, and I was really interested in hearing like what things were physical models.
Sure. So I have some. This is great timing for this because we've been releasing a lot of behind the scenes stuff, which is great. So I had a lot of stuff to pull from. What was really incredible about. So I was on pre-production for The Mandalorian. So what was really cool about The Mandalorian was that it was almost entirely shot on a soundstage in LA. So all the backgrounds you see, all those giant vistas and the ice town and things like that, those aren't real. And what's also amazing is that they're being displayed on an enormous curved LED screen. So so for the team I was on for that show, our team's role was getting those images onto those screens so it looked convincing. So you can see I actually had, let's see, let me pull this up. I can show, I think this is it right here. Also, I don't have a picture of it, but the Razor Crest, the Mando's like
The
main ship.
Yeah.
A lot of shots of that were also practical. Like that was a miniature.
Oh.
It's about this big, and so it actually used an old Star Wars like camera trick where to make it look like it's like passing by the camera really fast. The model is stationary and the camera moves by it. So that's a trick that they had used all the time for the original movies. So yeah, the models, it's about this big, thereabouts. But yeah, let me pull this up here. So can everyone see this okay?
Yep.
Sweet. So,
which we can.
So this is a 3D representation of what the stage looks like. But what we can do, one of the really cool tricks that we can do now is we actually use video game technology to put backgrounds on these giant screens in real time, and perspective can change based on the location of the camera. So we have those mocap trackers that you saw in the earlier pictures. It's essentially an iPad, but it has a bunch of these markers on it, and the director can move through the scene and use the iPad as a camera, and the background will change perspective based on that camera position. So this is kind of a visualization of how the stage looks when it's shooting. So you can see this is very cool. So the screen, that white background are giant screens. So you can see parts of the practical set. You can see like that doorway off on screen right. You can see that Herzog's desk right there. So they turned on the background right there, so you can see the rest of the set in context, which is very cool. So, so it's very hard to tell. What's very interesting is in some places, it's very hard to tell what's practical and what's not. So this is the stage that was shot on. So you can see the backgrounds.
So did they make the floor then?
So there'll be like texture on the floor, yeah, and then it'll extend out into the background. And they do a lot of really cool perspective tricks with the engine that drives the background screens to make it look convincing if you were to move left or right. One of the drawbacks or limitations from, because rear projection is a movie making technique that's been around for 100 years, almost 100 years, and so, but your camera has to be locked, right? If you move the camera in either direction, the illusion is broken. But now with a video game engine, you can move the background with the camera, so the illusion isn't broken. So there are some shots here with the volume. These are our stage technicians who are working on set. So this is a combination of the ground, which is real. Also, you can see you can rotate the stage for lighting, or the stage, but you can rotate the background, so the director can get the right lighting. So you can see part of the TIE fighter there is real. There's the cockpit is practical. So the cockpit here in the foreground is all practical, and they have some fans on his cape, and but the background is digital. So yeah, even as, oh, and I like this one a lot here too. So you can see, like, if I was to if I was to just show a still of that background, I don't know if I'd be able to say like, oh, that's not real or not.
Yeah.
And what's also really cool about this real-time way of working is that you can have people on set triggering events like explosions and lasers and things from an iPad. You see this little iPad that's in the foreground here, and that triggers events that the actor can react to, so you get a more realistic performance, and you also get realistic lighting. Like, there's less that you have to mimic in CG, and you get things like reflections, and it looks more convincing and grounded. But here the Razor Crest cockpit is partially practical. The part that Mando's sitting in right there. We also did that answer your question? I hope
Yeah,
so.
that was great. Thank you.
Sweet. For Solo, we also did something similar, which is really cool. So let's see. Let's see if this. Oh. So share this guy here. So for Solo, we used a similar technique, but it was a giant rear projection screen that's curved. It wasn't an LED screen like the Mandalorian used. So what they did was they built part of the Falcon cockpit, and then it's surrounded by this giant rear projection screen, and so when the actors would go to hyperspace, they'd trigger that event happening, and then the actors would get this reaction because it looks and feels almost like you're riding you're on a ride at Disneyland, you know. So all that lighting is real, and it helps the artists who were integrating that imagery into the CG, and it also helps the actors give a more convincing performance, because if you're acting against a green screen, it's hard to tell. You'll see all these like funny pictures on set of like ping pong balls up on sticks to direct eye movement and things. So when you have something like this that the actor can react to, it's much more convincing.
Yeah, they're having an actual genuine experience. So.
Yeah, from what it sounded like on set, the actors like because it was so immersive, the actors really got excited every time they had to go to hyperspace because it felt like a ride. So I think that's really cool. This is like what I find really fascinating about filmmaking, about modern filmmaking, is that a lot of these techniques, like at their core, they've been around since the dawn of the industry, but you have a lot of really cool technology that can make it more convincing and more realistic. You're doing this, it's all the same tricks, which I find really fascinating. There's a lot of like really amazing history here. So were there any other questions before I show some more stuff?
I had a question.
Sure.
So when you're working on bigger productions, I know that you will like sometimes work with other companies like Weta or something. So, like on Endgame, what's it like, working with another company and like trying to manage all the different products coming in?
It's very tricky. We actually write a lot of software to help us do that. It helps that with our industry, we actually have a lot of file format standards. So when we're moving an asset, if we're sharing an asset with another company like Weta, we have a standard, so we know that what we send them, they're going to be able to open and use. It is very tricky though. Every company has their own kind of like special sauce for how they do a lot of things. Some companies specialize in very specific types of VFX. So there's actually a lot of software that's required for packaging up work, removing proprietary information, and sending it to another company, and then the inverse. Like if we were to get something from Weta, there's a lot of software we write to bring that into our studio, conform it to our pipeline, so we can use it in shots. It's a very difficult problem, especially where you have software changing so quickly. It definitely helps that we know that when we're working with other companies, we speak the same language, so to speak.
Cool.
Yeah.
I wanted, before we jump into more visuals, I was wondering if you might be able to give us like a little bit of a background story of like what what your trajectory was like educationally, like perhaps like I know that you haven't been in this exact role for the entirety of your career, and you've done various other things in other industries as well. Mm-hmm. And I thought you could like maybe speak a little bit about your journey.
Sure thing. So I started I started playing around with computers and programming like really, really young. One of the easiest entry for me at the time was making websites. So that was how I got started. I was making websites for friends and teachers in high school. I thought when I was going to college that I would continue making websites. That's what I originally thought I was going to go to school for. And I found this program, Digital Media at Drexel, is this half fine art, half computer science type program. And it's really for visual effects, animation, and video game design. So you spend half of your time painting, figure drawing, things like that. And then you spend the other half of the time learning programming, learning a lot of these CG packages. so I found that program, and I love movies, and I realized that I could be a software engineer and make movies, and I was sold. Um, However, it was getting into the film industry is also not easy. So I even remember, I still have it somewhere. I still have my rejections from both DreamWorks and Lucasfilm. I still hold on to them as a way to as
Mementos.
reminders. Yeah, but yeah, I really wanted to get into animation and movies in general, and coming out of school, I still had a lot to learn. I worked for a small startup video game company right out of college. That's no longer around. And after that, I went to Xbox for a while, and I worked on the team that makes the actual console. So I was doing some rigging for characters there, which was excellent. I also love playing games. There's a very interesting, I think, thing where people who love playing games don't always enjoy making them. It's a very different experience, and I enjoy playing games. I think one of the things that always that I didn't like about video games personally, some people like it. For me, making video games, especially now when you can patch and you can put out downloads and updates, that a project's never really done. And what's really great about film is when unless you're doing these small fixes for a DVD release or something, when it's in the theater, like that's it, like it's done. and it's great seeing that as a complete thing. And I love that, and experiencing that with a group, with a theater. There's nothing like experiencing one of these shows in a full theater with people. You're like nervous. You really hope people will like it. You're constantly refreshing Rotten Tomatoes the week before the release, because you want people to like it. You spend a lot of time, and a lot of people spend a lot of time to make this thing. Film crews are huge, and a lot of people spent hours and hours of overtime to make this thing that they want to share with the world. So I wanted to move to film eventually, and I got the job at DreamWorks after Xbox, and I was a technical director for the surfacing department, the texture painting department, and I was at DreamWorks for it's about 2.5 years, and then I went briefly to a small visual effects studio called Atomic Fiction in Oakland, and then I moved to ILM, and I've been at ILM for 4 or 5 years. The thing that's interesting about this industry is that it's it's contract based. You work show to show, so I've been very lucky to have consistent work, but it's not the most stable job in the world. But you have an industry where people do it because they love it. I think you're just surrounded by a group of people who just love what they do and have a genuine interest in it. But yeah, I think it was interesting when I was leaving college and where I am now. I don't think I'd be able to put 2 and 2 together there. And I also found it interesting that like I felt like as a software engineer, I don't feel like I would be happy like writing apps or doing anything like that. Like I love art. I've always loved art. I always loved movies. I love visuals. I love video games. And I found it great to know that that there's space for software engineering and art to kind of live side by side. And you have this wonderful mix of people who has this excellent range of both technical and artistic knowledge. that it's reassuring to me that there is space for like art and creativity and visual storytelling, and also writing software.
And not to mention just like the fact that, you know, just by nature of what you do and what you've, you know, the expertise that you've accrued over time is, those are extremely transferable skills to like a lot of different things.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is like with the how we're using video game engines now on set, like for Mandalorian. You also have, we work a lot with the Disney parks. So ILM does visual effects for a lot of the rides as well, which is really fascinating. It's a very different problem, but a lot of the same theory applies, and you're doing a lot of the same thing. You're like tricking the audience. You're using a lot of smoke and mirrors to trick the audience into an experience that isn't necessarily real, right? And that's also very cool. So I think, and we have artists who've come from all sorts of different kind of walks of life. We have a lot of artists who were, like I'd mentioned, who were trained as traditional painters. We also have people who have worked in VR. We do a lot of work in VR, both for consumer, so both for stuff that people will use in the world, and then using VR for things like pre-visualization. So if a set's not built yet, on Ready Player One, Spielberg used VR a lot to scout the set, which didn't exist, but in VR he was able to kind of find the shots that he wanted. We built this large set in 3D.
Wow.
And in VR he was finding cameras that he wanted. He would do all his scouting that way. So it's fascinating. It moves really, really quick. There's always stuff to learn, but you have this really rich history, I think, that you're always learning from and drawing inspiration from. It's very cool.
So you were saying that like you feel like when you put your current experience like to your college experience, like it doesn't really like, so I'm curious about how when you were just getting started in the industry, like how much grace there was, I guess, and like how much you were learning on the job.
A lot. You learn a lot. I think. Well, and it is a very difficult industry just in the first place to get into, especially because productions move so fast. A lot of entry-level positions, you're starting as a PA, which isn't very fun. So it was a lot of persistence, and in all honesty, like I would go to job fairs as a student right out of school and feel very feel kind of lost, because there's a lot of other artists and engineers also looking for work who have more experience. I think one of the things that helps me as I move from job to job and find work is kind of maximizing the odds in your favor. So being flexible about moving. The film industry has a lot of people are relocating a lot. So being flexible there, being I think learning on the job. Like even though I was doing one job, I would take you have this amazing collection of knowledge around you, and just talking to people, and especially at Lucasfilm, people are super generous with their time and knowledge. So learning as much as you can, absorbing as much as you can is important. There is a lot of learning on the job for DreamWorks. a lot of the programming was done in a language that I didn't have much experience in. So you need to be super flexible. Yeah, and what's also interesting is I think you have to learn on the job anyway. A lot of, at ILM, we have an internal 3D package that that only we have. Pixar's the same way. So if you go to Pixar as an animator, they have some animation software that is not available in the world to consumers. So you have to be able to kind of quickly adapt there. It's a lot of persistence. It's a lot of being flexible, and a lot of just absorbing as much as you can. I'm still learning. I'm surrounded by people. I'm surrounded by people who have Oscars and who have technical awards, and there's this broad range, and everyone's super, super nice about sharing. So I think, yeah, taking that opportunity, even if you have an entry-level gig, even if you're coming in at entry level, maximizing your time with people, like trying to absorb as much as you can, is super important. Yeah, it did feel daunting. I'm not gonna lie, leaving school, but yeah, but looking back on,
interesting. Like, we talk about it all the time, like especially in my high school video class here with some of my babes, you know, like we would never have the budget or the space or, you know, whatever to try to like replicate some of the experiences that you're showing us right now. And it's like, and it's so far out of my purview that I'm like, I don't even know how I could teach this to you. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I would imagine that college programs would be in the same boat and that sort of situation. So it's just kind of like, how do you learn it? Like, how do you get there? How do you?
I think what's great is a lot of companies are starting to, so people can be more ready when they enter the workforce. A lot of companies are making their tools available under like a training license, which is really great. I believe Unreal, which was some of the technology that we used on Mandalorian. Unreal is available for under an education or a small studio license. That's very reasonable. And a lot of tools, Houdini, our effects package, like the package that we use to make a lot of our explosions and stuff. That I believe is also has a training license as well. I think it benefits companies to have people who want to get into film already with some knowledge. I think that definitely helps. But yeah, it's hard when you have a lot of these setups are enormous, right? The virtual production setups are really huge. But I think as that technology is becoming more available, even like motion capture technology is becoming more and more available. So I think keeping an eye on like trends like that, like virtual production is a huge trend in filmmaking, and keeping an eye on that and looking for things where the software has availability for training and stuff like that. Hope that helped. Did that help? Yeah.
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 I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, one of them was you talked about being flexible, like when you have to switch like to different productions because you're always going on like a new thing, new project.
Mm-hmm.
For the film industry, and I guess for your part, like the VFX part, is there a way that you can move up like along the lines? Because you talked about how you're like always learning. So is there a way you can start from the bottom but like be like at a really high level, or do you kind of just come in with like your same skills and you just kind of go along picking the job that you're at right then?
So there is room for advancement. It's not always easy, especially because the amount of work can change. This year is a perfect example where a lot of movies are pushing production, obviously because of quarantine. So there's less work, and it's affecting artists who've been working in the industry for years. But I have a lot of friends who will come into an entry-level role for VFX, for example. A render wrangler is an entry-level job in VFX, and your job is so we have a vast collection of machines that are used for rendering frames that go into the final movie. And a render wrangler's job is to make sure all that space is used efficiently, all those resources are used efficiently. And it's a typical job that you'll have entry level, but so a lot of the wranglers that I work with, they're really vocal about like, hey, I want to be an artist, I want to be a compositor, I want to be an animator. And then and you'll start to get shots like there'll be work, and your supervisor will say like, hey, we need some help with this particular sequence. Do you want to light this in your spare time or whatever? So I've had a lot of friends move into artist roles that way. We hired on the technical engineering side, we've hired interns. So if you keep your eye out for internships, that's also really important. We hire a lot of our interns. We also will also hire from entry level like wrangler roles as well. So I do like at Lucasfilm, at least in technology, that there's a push for giving people a roadmap. But since you're moving show to show, a lot of times, sometimes contracts are short. So you'll be working on a movie for 3 months, 6 months. And so if you're doing something like that, you want to just keep learning. Like I said, like find what really makes you excited, find out what really makes you inspired, because there's a lot of stuff to do on a production, and there's a lot of little moving pieces. And if you find something that really makes you, that really gets you excited to work in film, just learn as much as you can, absorb as much as you can. And if you have an opportunity like an internship, like that's a great way to absorb on the job. But yeah, it's a thing where you have to be proactive. Intern cycles you have to keep an eye on things like intern cycles but Lucasfilm, Disney Animation also has internships. Blue Sky Animation does as well. I'm not sure if Pixar still does, but yeah, you're always learning. Every day I learn something new, which I really love. So I'd get bored if it was the same day twice. So
I have a brief question about that, because you mentioned like moving from project to project, and like you're contracted project by project. So as an employee of ILM, are you sort of like in a way like a contractor of ILM? It's like when they get a new project, they assemble the crew, and then when that project's done, it's kind of happens. We're
a very weird kind of hybrid. Like fortunately we get benefits and health insurance. We get benefits like any other Disney employee would. But also, you're also renewing, like I renew my contract every so often. For engineers, for technical roles, you're a bit more flexible. If you're an animator, it can be really difficult to find work, especially if there's a lull. I know in the Bay Area, a lot of my friends who are animators, there used to be the Bay Area used to be a pretty great hub of animation in general. Now it's pretty much just, it's like Pixar, Lucasfilm, and Tippett. But it used to be a lot easier in the Bay Area for an animator to work on a project and then line up their next gig and then go to the next gig. And then if the studio that you were working at said like, oh, we'll have work in 5 months, we don't have work now, they'll find something to bridge the gap. Engineering, in the engineering side of things, I've always been fortunate to have some fairly consistent work, but it is stressful. I've been at studios that have closed, and then you're scrambling to find work. But Disney, I really enjoy working at Disney. The benefits wise, we are employees, but the employment is managed by a contract that is usually show to show. It's very strange.
Yeah. This kind of leads me into like it's a really short, brief series of questions that I ask all of the people that I interview, and I think it's just kind of, it's a cool thing. Is what is, and it might be hard, it might not come right to your head, but what is your favorite part of your job? What is the most difficult or least favorite part of your job? And what is something that somebody who is entering the industry or is not in the industry would be extremely surprised to know about your day-to-day work?
That's a good question. Good questions. I think for me, there's nothing like sitting in a theater, especially like for Rise of Skywalker this past year. I was really proud to be able to share that show in a theater with my family. Like all my family is back east, so I don't get to see them much. And I think it's super rewarding, and that can be really hard being away from family. And I think it's a really exciting experience to like be sitting next to your parents in a theater to show them like what you've been working on, and experiencing that with a theater, and seeing your name in the credits. It's always like this, there's a lot of pride there, especially as someone who just loves movies and who's always loved the filmmaking process. So I don't think there's anything like it. So I love that. And it can make the hard times hard, or it can make the hard times a lot better. You don't have a lot of choice as to what you work on. So you could be on a project that everyone hates, that the internet widely despises, and you're putting in a lot of overtime and working really hard on something that, if you wade into the comments,
people are just like trashing on Reddit or whatever.
Yeah, people are destroying it on Reddit, and you're like come man. So I think situations like that can be super, super difficult. I've been fairly lucky with the productions I've been on. I know friends who have been on shows that have like that for one reason or another, like they run out of, there's like the schedule they run out of time, or they run out of money, or like something goes wrong. A million things have to go right for a movie to get made. Like that's what's amazing to me, is you have this tornado of stuff, and at the end of it you have a movie. It's fascinating. But I've had friends who've been on movies that have just bombed in the theater, and you know that they've done insane overtime to get this thing out, and it just bombs, and that's super hard. You know, it's really hard. There's people people behind all this. Like, it's very easy to like approach a film and be like, oh, this is terrible, or it's very easy to do that, but it's very easy to lose sight of the people, the hundreds of people who put this thing together. But yeah, I think I've been lucky in that regard. And just in general, with a lot of the shops I've been at, I've had a really positive experience. So yeah, I think it's sometimes easy to get caught up in the weeds. It's like very easy, like it's a job like any other, and there'll be some days that'll be really frustrating, especially if you're working on a really hard problem. And it's like very easy to get lost in that. And one of my leads at DreamWorks always said something great, that when things were getting stressed out, or that when we were getting stressed out about stuff, he would be like, guys, we make cartoons. like don't get, like, everyone calm down. We make cartoons with fart jokes in them. Like calm down. and there's like some really great perspective there, that you're making something. It's easy to get caught up in the weeds, but you're making something to entertain people and make people happy. And I think that's great. So the thing I think that a lot of people don't realize, I think there's a couple things that people don't realize. I think a lot of people don't realize what's actually CG and what's not. I think it's always very funny to see when someone online is like, that was practical, and you're like, no, it wasn't. That was not real. And vice versa too. I think we're at this amazing time for movies where it's very hard to, or it's very easy to trick people. It's easy to pick out something that kind of stands out, but most shots in movies in some way have visual effects on them. So I think it's always very interesting. I'd highly recommend, I had a couple other breakdowns too.
Yeah.
If we had time,
Oh,
if
sure.
people were interested in seeing them, I think I would highly recommend people, if you're interested in this, looking up the term we use is breakdowns. So look for like ILM breakdowns online. We put all of them on YouTube. I like that it's a very academic type field. Like we like showing our work. We have technical conferences. Disney has a technical conference where all the Disney studios like us and Pixar and Imagineering all get together, and we have presentations and we talk about problems that we've solved. But yeah, I'd recommend looking at breakdowns online, because it's really fascinating to see what's real and what's not. And the other thing that I feel like always blows people's minds is every time I've mentioned this, I've kind of gotten a similar reaction, was that the movie is not done when the trailer comes out. Like I said, like we work on the movie up until sometimes weeks before theater, and for the trailer, we are working on those shots specifically, right? Like the director will pick what he or she wants in the cut, and then we focus on that. And sometimes there's a last minute change. And we have to like drop everything and run over to this and solve this problem over here. Yeah, everything, a lot of times, more often than not, things come together right before things go to theater. Recently, you even have stuff where you have technical fixes, like for Cats, where you had technical fixes after the theater release, which was mind-blowing to me. But it was really fascinating. Like, it's very easy to do that now, and yeah, it's very easy for a director to make changes. I think when you have it's always amazing when you're on a crew where the filmmaker and the crew kind of like click into place. There have been some shows that I've worked on where everything was crazy smooth, because the filmmaker is really good about making decisions and saying, I want that to look like that. I trust you all to do what you do best. And then you'll work with some filmmakers who don't like making decisions and who will like wait up until the last minute. So I think that's fascinating. The process it's still, I was in games for about 3 years, and I've been in 3 or 4, and I've been in film for 6 or 7. And the process still blows my mind every time something comes out in a theater. Like when I'm sitting in a theater and it's like, man, I can't believe that got done. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
There any other questions?
I have another question.
Sure, shoot.
So you had mentioned before that the first 2 times that you applied to DreamWorks and ILM, you got rejected. So like, what made you decide to keep pursuing that and keep trying to push for a job there, even though they had already rejected you?
That was a very good question. I really wanted it. And I think that's hard. That's a really hard thing, or it's like very easy for me to say, but I know what I was feeling at the time. I even remember, it was a brutal interview. I remember at my second interview at DreamWorks, one of the supervisors who was on my interview panel, who ended up being one of my supervisors, and we had a really great rapport, but it was a brutal interview. He had recognized me from interviewing me a couple years before when I was right out of school, and he had said something along the lines of, "Oh, we've interviewed you before." Like it wasn't as curt as this, but it felt curt at the time, where he said like, "What?" It was essentially like, "What? Why should this time be different?" And you learn so much. I think knowing what you don't know is super important. And many companies that I've applied at and I haven't gotten the job have been very good at DreamWorks. Like the first time I didn't get the job at DreamWorks, the recruiter sent me a card and said like, hey, this is, if you work on this stuff, try again. Like, and other companies have done that too. Like, be vocal and be proactive in asking, like, if you don't get the gig, it's okay to say, like, it's okay to ask, what can I improve upon? What would you recommend learning? It's totally okay. And you should advocate for yourself and be vocal. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. But I think if it's something that you're super excited about, I think the journey and the process is also kind of exciting in a way. Yeah, but yeah, it's not easy. I can even feel kind of when that question came up in the interview, like my heart just like just sank. Yeah. But yeah, I think but he was, I think that supervisor was just wanted to see what I'd learned and why I was being persistent and why I loved, or why I wanted to do this, which is totally fair.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Great.
That's
Thank
a good
you.
question. That's a very good question. I saw, there's a chat. Sorry if I missed, there's a chat.
Oh no, I think she just said she had to take off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was Addie.
Cool. Yeah, sorry we went a little over. If we want to see some more visuals, I had some other kind of cool stuff. But,
sure, we can. I mean, we put them up. You know,
cool?
and yeah, and I'm just gonna record this. It's recording, and I'll post it for anybody that,
sure,
if they weren't able to stick around or they want to watch it after the fact.
Cool. So a couple of other things, just to show the kind of array of experience that of things that we do, and what my day-to-day job is like and all the kind of layers and parts to a particular thing. So for Ready Player One, one of the big things, the problems that we had to solve was having these really big battles of all these online players. As part of the crowds, and I was doing a lot of crowds and mocap work for that show. So this is like one of the shots that I think is one of the coolest. I don't know who's seen the movie, but if you have, you recognize the shot. So this shot, all these people kind of running and fighting, is a collection of people wearing those ping pong ball suits. And we capture and have to manage, thousands of these motions of people running and fighting. This was just, the scale of this was always like really, really cool to me. And the sheer like visual intensity, I think, of it was also very fascinating. Let's see, we have, so we did, I have a couple breakdowns too. For when I was at the visual effects shop in Oakland, we did a lot of work for Deadpool. And Deadpool was a lot of fun because of how insanely cartoony everything was. And we had a lot of like really interesting problems to solve there when it comes to destruction. So we had, this was like kind of a breakdown of, these are the different things. Let's see, share. So this is one of the shots, and then kind of the various layers that kind of go into it. We do a lot of low resolution destruction so we can simulate it faster. And then we put high resolution geometry. We use that to drive high resolution geometry. So you have a lot of like bad guys here having a rough day. But what's kind of fascinating here too is that it's another old film technique. We use debris cannons in effects, where if you have something exploding, you'll have, on a practical set, you'll have like an air cannon that shoots like styrofoam and bits, right, to mimic a larger explosion. And we do the same thing in CG. Like with this car, we'll have a whole bunch of various pieces that we explode out when the car hits. There were a bunch of cool behind this Deadpool behind the scenes I thought was really cool, because it shows we do a lot of environment work too. So we'll replace the environment. I can just let this play through and talk over it. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, I remember that scene too.
So like now the background was real. He's sitting on a green screen. This car chase was all shot on green screen, which was a lot of fun. So there's like, you'll see a lot of artists just painting things out and removing things, and all these different layers. So you'll see like the green screen layer, and then a lot of effects layers go on top of it. And the compositors are the ones who take all of those layers and put them together and integrate it into a final scene. So this was a lot of simulation of throwing people out of cars and cars spinning and flying and stuff. And there's a lot of research and development and work to get a look right even before we start rendering final frames. So yeah, every project is different. Every show is different. This show was a lot of destruction and a lot of cars crashing into each other. We have a lot of stuff. There were some paint outs as well. Saw some of this. So So yeah, like a lot of cars spinning around in CG. A lot of mimicking atmosphere and spray from the road and stuff like that.
Have there ever been any examples of like
We'll do a lot of background replacement as well.
Wow.
So adding in buildings or things like that.
Have you ever encountered any examples of people being like?
And you'll see for this shot, we replaced almost every building in the background for this one. And then finally, I just had some stuff from F9 too, which I thought was really beautiful. So I can pull that up as well.
I was wondering if have you ever had any examples of people being like?
Sorry. I think you're muted.
Oh, am I muted? Did I get muted?
Oh, there, I can hear you now.
Oh, cool. Maybe it's my headphones. Have you ever had any examples of people being like, that was so fake, that can't be, and it was actually like a real shot?
Yeah. Well, actually, so another kind of interesting practical, it related to the Mandalorian. A lot of, so there was a child puppet on set. But a lot of times there were a lot of shots that people online got wrong where they thought it was a puppet walking around and it's an animated CG character, which I thought speaks to when you're trying to nail a look, like you're trying to nail a particular kind of physicality to a thing. I thought that was a perfect example. I thought if given a sequence of seeing like the child throughout the show, I would be hard pressed for people to guess what's animated and what's practical and beat random chance. I think that was one of the most recent examples that I thought was really fascinating. Yeah, there's one of the few things I like Twitter for is watching filmmakers dunk on people who guess wrong. Since we have this like communication medium where you can have filmmakers directly interact with viewers, I think it's always great when you have a moment when someone's very, very sure about something and the director pops on and it's like, nah. But yeah, it's fascinating. There's some things that, like I said, like a lot of stuff with Parasite tricked me, and it's like seamless stuff that's that seamless always blows my mind. So I'll let this play well. If there are any more questions, we can.
I had a question real quick.
Sure.
So, like, since you were talking about like environment building,
sorry. Yep.
How would you go about building like a city or like a skyline like that people like is very easily recognizable, and like putting characters into a city where people are like, oh, I know exactly where that is,
It's a very difficult problem. A good example, was it the most recent? I think the most recent Ant-Man. I think Ant-Man and the Wasp. A lot of it was shot in Atlanta. I think this is right. I'm caveating this, but a lot of this is very frequent where. With something like Ant-Man, where it's shot in one location and made to look like San Francisco, say, they'll do some shots in the real location, but a lot of times it's less expensive to shoot somewhere else and to change the facades of things. And it's a really difficult problem. There's a lot of artists who work to make that happen. There's a lot of reference footage and photography. You take as much footage like reference as possible. We use a lot of LiDAR So laser scanning to get high resolution reference geometry that the modelers will build stuff against. It'll also be depending on the shot. So if the buildings are far away, you can just put them in as flat kind of like images. If you have things where the camera's moving around stuff, you have to build it in 3D. So you need a modeler to create it. If you have to destroy something, if there's like a destruction, if a building is blowing up, you have to have an effects artist take that model and then break it down and simulate that in a way that looks physically accurate. And we have a lot of crowd artists whose their job is simulating the way people move on streets. So they place what are called agents, and they'll run a simulation where people will walk through a scene, and if they interact with someone, they'll do something random, or it's a very, very complicated process with a lot of moving parts. A lot of the times you're the supervisors will sit down with the filmmaker and go through the script and go through storyboards and ask what they want to happen, because that drives how you solve a particular problem. There's a million ways to solve a lot of these problems. And it's all about like what the filmmaker wants that determines how we approach a problem.
All right.
Yeah, for EP9, there was a lot of stuff. This was a very effects heavy show, but we did a lot of stuff like face replacement because Carrie had passed away. She was still part of this movie. There was a lot of work and care done to put her convincingly in the movie. So we used a combination of existing footage. We used some digidoubles. But yeah, this is a great, I feel like this is a great selection of all the types of things that we do. Painting out puppeteers, because puppeteers are operating physical puppets as well. We do background replacements, like you can see here, adding these huge crowd scenes. 3D models, the Stormtrooper digital doubles, adding effects for things like explosions and dust. Removing wires, we remove a lot of wires from people jumping and flying. Supplementing puppets. Maz had some dialogue changes over the course of the movie, so we had to change choose a mix of CG and a puppet. We had to change her lip sync. And some really large destruction. This. So you can see all these different layers that go into a single frame, and we do it for 2,000 shots. And for a big movie like this, you're talking 2,000 shots.
Unreal.
Yeah, I think this was my favorite sequence. The lightsaber battle. I think that was my favorite sequence. Yeah, especially for these big battles. And what's incredible is that you look at something like Return of the Jedi, and this was all done optically, like this was all done on film, which continues to blow my mind, that what those artists were able to accomplish without digital technology, just using film still is astounding to me. I find that just mind-blowing. And one of the cool, there's some digital makeup here. I had mentioned some digital makeup early on, but they'll even like invisible things. I think it's towards the very end. Like one of the invisible things that people may not have caught. I think it's coming up here. Yeah, so adding grime, bruises, and that visor, like those weren't real, which I thought was great. And the sandcrawler here was practical, was a miniature with forced perspective. So yeah, the great thing, I think the great thing about visual effects is you have all of these different tools to solve different problems, and it's all about finding the right tool for the job and like how can you best trick the audience, and how can you best fool the eye into seeing what's not there. I think that's a wonderful way. I'm very lucky to be able to do that for a living. So.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Thank you so much for your time, man. I mean, I don't know if anyone has any last questions to wrap this up, but
yeah, sorry, I talk a lot, so
no, it was amazing, man. It was really amazing.
This was so cool to hear about. Like, I really appreciate you offering this conversation too. I know that like my video students speak like some of the language, you know, so it was really cool to hear, and it's really important too. I feel like, and I tell them this all the time, that like you have to be a lifelong learner. Like, I can only teach you so much. Your college classes can only teach you so much, and the technology is constantly evolving. So even if you get that degree, you're still going to have to continue. Yep. And I really love how you emphasize that and like how you lived that experience. I think it's really rad that like you shared all of this with us today. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, if anyone has any like follow-up questions too, I'm more than happy to answer them. It's always fun to geek out about this stuff. It's something I love doing, and I love talking about it. So
yeah,
I actually have a last minute question.
Sure.
So this is specifically about Star Wars, with you having worked on The Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. I saw it in a lot of shots with the Mandalorian himself, the main character. In a lot of the behind the scenes shots, his whole suit looked like it was like a practical suit. Mm-hmm. Whereas I know in the Star Wars series and in a lot of other movies, you'll have characters that have sort of like they're in suits where entire characters will be done digitally. What goes into the decision making for when that is done practically versus digitally when it comes to character costuming?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it has to do with I'm getting a little out of my depth because that moves more towards the practical side. But a lot of times that has to do with what the actor has to be able to perform. Sometimes with the costuming, it's restrictive in a way that doesn't allow it. I'd seen that there were some plates for episode 9 where C-3PO was wearing he was wearing his top costume, but since he was walking through the desert, he was just wearing green. It was like green pants. Like his legs had to be added digitally because it was too hot in Jordan or too restrictive. Sometimes it's creative. Sometimes there'll be like a last minute creative change where the filmmakers will say, they'll have shot everything and they'll be like, wait, we need to make it look like this instead for continuity or whatever. So we'll do digital, we'll add to costumes digitally for that. A lot of digital makeup you'll see for consistency, like Rey having like bruises and scuff marks and stuff. We'll do stuff like that. Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination of how is the actor able to do their job in what they're wearing, and are there any creative changes that need adjustment after the fact? Avengers is another great example. Endgame, when they're walking, there's like a great shot of them walking through the lab, and they're all wearing these like really awesome space age costumes, and everyone assumed that those costumes were real, and they were not, which is cool. Yeah, I think it's whatever the filmmaker needs, you kind of adjust, and it can change shot to shot too. Some shots will have more practical bits of costuming, and some you really you try to get away with whatever you can, and what makes it easiest on both the actors and the filmmakers.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think maybe we should wrap it up now. But if you guys think of any questions later on, any of you guys, feel free. You know, if you're willing, you know, they could email me and I could relay them to you and
Perfect.
connect. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this. It was very cool.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks for everyone's time and attention. I always love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Cool.
Well, I'll talk to you soon, man.
Yeah, we'll catch up later. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. See you all later. Have a good day.
Cheers.